I think the exposure triangle is stupid. It says that everything in a good exposure is based off of these three numbers, and it completely takes you out of the process. Okay, so over the past few videos, we have talked about the exposure triangle. And while the exposure triangle is fundamentally a decent concept, it's a bit outdated. So that exposure triangle is designed for a certain type of person. It was designed for a certain type of person by a certain type of person. And that person is the number nerd, the one who thinks that they can click a few dials and it is the numbers and the settings that make the shot. It is the numbers and the settings and the caliber of the gear that actually makes a great photographer. But those very same people, when you look at their art, they're just, I mean, some of it's good, but for the most part it's not. And they don't shoot a lot of pictures, they only shoot a few pictures. It takes them an hour and a half to set up, and everything is a slight dial this way or a slight dial that way. And if you don't do what they want you to do, then you're obviously not a good photographer in their eyes. The number nerd thinks that they can just set the exposure just the right way, and then no matter what they point their camera at, they're going to get a great shot.
They're so stupid!
So let's talk about the fourth element in that exposure triangle, which doesn't make it a triangle anymore. I think we're gonna have to call it the circle of exposure. The circle of exposure depends on one more element in order to make great shots. That element is you. That's right, that element is you. While you can go into a situation and you can have your ISO perfect, you can have your f-stop set to exactly where you want that focal plane to be, and the depth of field is just perfect, and you get your shutter speed just right because something's either in action or everything around you slow or whatever it is, you ultimately are the one that makes the shot. You ultimately are the one that decides what is overexposed, what is underexposed, what look and feel are you going for? Do you want to draw people's eye to what's happening in the shadows, or do you want to draw people's eye to what's happening in the light? Does this picture look too dark? Do you need to make those changes to those settings? Is this picture too bright? Do you need to make those changes to those settings? You are the fourth element here, and you are the one that no one ever talks about in this whole exposure triangle photography experience. Sure, people are telling you what dials to flip, what buttons to push, and how to use this line and that line, but no one is ever talking about you as a creator. Remember, photography is an art form. If you're not creating art with photography, you're just running through mechanical processes. And that's what the exposure triangle does, is it says that everything in a good exposure is based off of these three numbers, and it completely takes you out of the process. It removes you from the artistic creation of a shot. Now, I'm going to be the first one to tell you, you need to understand the other three components in the circle of exposure. You have to. If you don't understand those other three elements, you cannot create the art that you want. If you take yourself out of the equation, the camera will take no pictures. The paintbrush will paint no paintings. The chalk will draw no pictures, right? The clay will not sculpt itself. So you are a very important part of that exposure, that circle of exposure. Every image you take does have those three other elements in it. It does have ISO, it does have f-stop, it does have shutter speed, and they are all very, very important factors. But the ultimate factor, the number one most important thing in any exposure is you. How do you see the scene? How do you understand the way the light is working? How do you see the subjects that are in it? Exposing the image is important, and using the bottom three of this circle of exposure is very important, but you cannot take you out of it. So let me say that one more time. I think the exposure triangle is stupid. All of those decisions come from you. That makes you a part of the process. So the exposure triangle, dumb as shit in my opinion. Sorry, it's just the way it is. Fight me over it. But if you really, really, really want to understand that exposure experience, you need to make sure that you understand that you are a part of that process. And just because the guy in the corner with the ponytail and no hair on the top and the circular glasses and the goatee that tells you that you have to do it by this number and that number and this number and that number, f that guy. Now, just because Brian said, oh, well, I get to make all the decisions on exposure. That's true, you do, but it doesn't mean you get to go out there and throw all the rules out the window. Those rules are there for a reason because many photographers have run through it over and over and over again, and they understand how it works, and your tool is based off of those rules. Don't let the numbers guys get you down. Stay focused. Learn your ISO, learn your f-stop, learn your shutter speed. Learn them by practicing, but don't forget that you are the one that has to practice. When you make this do the work, then this is just a tool.